as a theist, are you one of these people that thinks like the Christian God is the only kind of God that can exist?
Yeah, so I think Christian God is necessary.
Oh, okay. Well, then wouldn't an argument against the, like, because that's a little bit weird, because I feel it's kind of weird from your perspective to say, well, the argument against the perfect, like, problem of evil or whatever wouldn't prove that some other kind of God exists when you do believe that the God you believe in is the necessary one. So there isn't like an option B,
Yeah, I agree. There is no option B. But because of my worldview is that this is the option, this is the necessary being. If you were to debunk my worldview, I'm not going to revert to atheism, because all you've shown is that my worldview is collapsed, right? So that necessary being is out the window. I can now collapse to another worldview, and that other worldview could be this limited God.
Okay, that's a little weird to me, because it sounds like you're starting with like a true dichotomy, either my God or there is no other God. Yeah, but then you're saying like you'd be willing to like change your mind, but it's not like there's something wrong with being willing to change your mind.
No. So I think you misunderstand. So what I'm saying is, yes, I do believe my God is necessary. I believe that's the way that it has to be. But let's say that you came up with an argument that did change my mind, that convinced me that my God isn't necessary. I'm not going to revert to atheism based off of that. I'm just now going to be convinced that my God is no longer necessary.
Normally when people talk about the problem of evil, from my perspective, what I think they kind of get wrong is they talk about humans doing terrible things to other humans. And you guys have a response to that, which is like, we live in a fallen state and people have free will to like inflict misery, which is a decent response. But I think that there's more ways to approach the problem of evil that I think are really problematic, which is that in terms of it being evidence for atheism, one of the things about the majority of suffering we experience, like getting diseases or an asteroid hitting the earth and causing billions of deaths, or a wildfire.
One second.
Oh, yeah. So all of these like random acts of nature, basically, that cause these horrendous sufferings, they're all like impersonal forces. Mm-hmm. Now, under naturalism, atheism, whatever you want to call it, I mean, we would expect that. It's literally how life is shaped on this planet. Extinctions are, and the struggle with nature is part of the evolutionary process. Under naturalism, I think you'd kind of expect that. But under theism, I feel like there really isn't a lot of room for impersonal forces, because it's all unfolds according to God's divine will or planned or whatever. So I think you'd have to be committed to the idea that God desired or thought it would be good that a cosmic ray would give somebody cancer, for example. So before like going on and on and on, I'll let you respond to that.
Yeah, so that just starts off the premise that you think that the theist has to hold the position that all evils are necessary to some sort of degree. Do you hold that?
That they're well, I don't know if they're necessary, but
from the theist perspective.
They wouldn't have to be necessary, but God can choose for them to not exist, and it would seem that this God would want them to exist, because I don't know why God would sit back and allow natural forces to do whatever it is they do without his intention or foresight.
So you're making a probabilistic argument then, rather than a logical argument. So do you agree that there is no logical inconsistency in evil and an all-loving God?
Well, two things. I would say, yeah, I never thought about it this way, but I would probably couch it as more probabilistic. The second thing was, I don't see a logical inconsistency between evil existing, or say it again.
So yeah, most people, when they bring up the problem of evil, they start on the logical problem of evil, where they basically say that you cannot logically have an all-loving God and the problem of suffering or animal suffering or the problem of evil. And so they say it's a contradiction, so it doesn't work. That's a different argument than if you're saying it's a probabilistic, which is the evidential problem of evil, where you're saying it seems to be due to all these evil things that it's less likely that a God exists because it's more probable and expected under naturalism.
Yeah, well, I would say it's, I don't think it poses any logical problem for naturalism, but I think that it does pose a problem under theism, or like the
a logical or evidential one.
Well, I would say logical, and I would say what I'm doing is I'm looking at the way things are and evidentially saying, saying one's more likely than the other.
Okay, so yeah, that's an easy one then. So the logical problem of evil is basically stated from like my perspective. It's called a defeater argument. Basically states that at the end, God is going to defeat all evil to the point where all beings will retroactively look upon the suffering that they've gone through and consent to going through it. Very similar to when we look upon our own lives and we say, yeah, those things were terrible, didn't need to happen, but I wouldn't change my life.
But doesn't that make the suffering pointless?
It is pointless.
So how do you reconcile a perfect being inflicting or allowing for pointless suffering?
Because they will defeat it. They will ultimately destroy it, and not so much like reward us, but put us in a state of being where we consent to us going through it.
So then, but it's completely possible that God would, defeat, because like you can say there's evil or wrong in the world. Not all forms of evil and wrong are suffering. So I don't see how the world of like misery and suffering that some, conscious beings endure, like humans and animals or whatever, would in any way need to happen just because there's going to be, retribution down the road. Why not allow any of that and then still conquer evil, in the end?
Yeah, so now you're kind of shifting into the evidential, where we're weighing the cases, we're weighing the probabilities. So do you concede that like the logical, we're good with that? There's no logical contradictions?
I still kind of think it is because, you just said that there is pointless suffering, and I don't see how the redemption, who knows, like it could literally be trillions of years down the road. We just have absolutely no idea. It in any way deals with the fact that the pointless suffering ever occurred.
So can you say that again?
So you said ultimately there's this redemptive piece to where all the suffering that occurs is negated, or it's like it becomes kind of meaningless, right?
No, you consent to it. Not that it becomes meaningless. It becomes one of those things where you look upon it and you're like, I consent to the suffering I went through. Very similar to like the analogy I said before, where it's like, okay, I've suffered in my life. I wouldn't change my life, right? It's made me who I am, or so to speak.
So in the end, we'll all accept the suffering that occurred because of the redemption, and that evil will be conquered eventually.
The evil's conquered, the evil's destroyed. We move into new beings, new creation. The analogy that was given to me that I think works really well is if you look at a mosaic, like you look at a glass figure, what do you call it?
Mosaic. Like stained glass?
Yeah, like stained glass. Yeah. So you have like stained glass. If you zoom in on an individual piece, it's just a broken glass. It doesn't make any sense. It's like, oh, that's horrible. That's terrible. But when you zoom away from that broken piece and you see all those broken pieces put together, you have this beautiful image, this redemptive arc that comes from it.
I don't really like that analogy from your perspective, because that individual broken piece is a necessary part of the whole. And then you'd have to be saying that God deems all this suffering necessary, which I think you'd have to say that God desires for it to happen. But I don't see. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, it doesn't have to be necessary, because the broken piece could be another form, could be another broken piece, could be in-line broken piece. It's just when it's all put together, you get this redemptive arc. So it's not the fact that it was designed to be that way. It's that it was put together even though it was that way.
Yeah, I don't know. And maybe we're just looking at this so differently that I can't understand what you're saying, and you can't understand what I'm saying. But it's just, God could have created a world where that kind of suffering doesn't happen, and Jesus still comes back in the end, and evil is conquered or whatever. Or he could have created this world with all this suffering, and he did create the world that from point A to point B, the journey is kind of miserable, and that just wasn't necessary, but it just seems like God desired to do it that way. And I just find it to be a weird commitment you have to make, that God wanted things to play out in that way.
Sure. Yeah, that's fine, but that's a different argument. That's an evidential argument again. So I want to make sure that we've gotten through the logical argument before we move to an evidential argument. And so what I'm showing is that there is no P and not P in my worldview. unless you can point at the contradiction.
Well, I guess the general contradiction is people would say that they don't see how an omnibenevolent God would create or cause or desire for pointless suffering to occur, but pointless suffering does occur according to God's design and I guess plan for us. So where's the reconciliation in that?
Yeah, the reconciliation is in the defeating of the evil that you would have gone through, the absolute destruction and destroying of it. Justice. That's the definition of justice. Is something does you harm, and then that harm that fell upon you faces justice. It faces trial, it faces execution, it faces destruction, things like this. This, by definition, is redemption.